This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
Theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The
nefarious,
Significant and protracted
political
theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick. The recent elevation of Representative Mike Johnson to be Speaker of the House has brought up questions about the Louisiana Republicans' record and positions in several areas. And while Congress adjusts to a new speaker amid high-profile fights over aid to Israel and Ukraine and domestic spending, one part of Johnson's record is well documented: his opposition to equal rights for the LGBTQ plus community, specifically on gay marriage and protection from employment discrimination. Filmmakers Melinda Maerker and David Miller have a new documentary for Hulu, We Live Here, the Midwest, which gives voice to the LGBTQ plus community in places that are not always hospitable to them. And they join the podcast to discuss their project and its message.
It's more unusual here in rural Iowa to have two parents of the same gender.
We both grew up in Des Moines. We've been here our whole lives. We've never left.
Midwestern culture has an overall resistance to change. We're just people living in a community. Just two parents and a child growing up in the Midwest.
We are probably 1 out of 3 Black families, let alone gay families. A lot of people assume that we're brothers or cousins. We're just who we are.
After I had come out, all of the energy got focused onto Katie and her preaching.
I gave a significant amount of my life to the church. I desperately miss the church.
Transitioning is a huge undertaking, and it's not for the faint of heart. I wasn't expecting my daughters to be in my life.
What my dad was feeling and why she felt like she did was more than just her. Like, there's more people out there who are like this.
I very much believe that the bullying has re-emerged as a hot topic for LGBTQ plus students.
The students believe that non-binary people do not exist. I'm here right now, so that we do exist.
Across the nation, we're seeing a shift in who our political leaders are. They're mad at me because I'm an Indigenous queer woman sitting at the table, and the death threats that come with that show that people are still shook that we're here.
This is the moment.
All of a sudden, 2016 came, and it's almost like we went backwards.
We're altering what defines a nuclear family.
Our world is changing, whether you like it or not. That's the part that people don't realize.
Do we stay and fight, or do we go? But where do you go? Where there's stability and safety. Because it does feel like at any moment, anywhere, it could change.
This is the moment.
Melinda and David, welcome to Political Theater.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. So let's talk. We'll get into some of the more the politics of it, and particularly the speaker's record and what that says about kind of where we are. We're heading into an election cycle. But first, I'm just curious. I mean, the two of you, like this will premiere on Hulu on December 6th. How did you come to this project? From what was how did you two meet and decide that this was going to be the thing that you were going to spend a lot of time and effort on?
Well, we worked together on a project a number of years ago about LGBTQ families and different configurations and how they came about. And that was very sweet and lovely. And then 2016 happened, and it ushered in this backlash that was really scary. And as you mentioned, marriage equality, which had been such a joyous, celebratory thing, was suddenly, oh my goodness, threatened. So we were curious as to how these families, LGBTQ families, were doing. And we chose the Midwest specifically because it is known as the heart of American family values. What do those values look like, and who do they include?
so many of the people who you talk to, and you talk to you pack a lot into a very concise documentary. It runs under an hour, but you talk to families in Iowa, in Ohio, in Kansas, in Nebraska, in Minnesota. I mean, there's a lot of voices in this, a lot of people kind of living their lives, and also a lot of people are have a background in the church, and I mean they grew up in the same sort of setting as a lot of where the criticism is coming, and that must have been just kind of heart wrenching to hear people. I mean, there's one couple who just talks about how they had to leave the church after spending their entire lives there.
Yeah, I mean, it was really important for us to choose a not only diverse cast, but along the spectrum of the whole LGBTQ plus arena. And I think that when Katie describes how traumatic it was for her to leave the church when it was the church that taught her to love Nia,
There's a couple in Iowa who sort of starts the film.
Yeah, I mean, they were high school sweethearts. They married. They had 4 children, and then after the 4th child, Nia transitioned, and then they had a 5th child, and they stayed together, which I thought was a fascinating story in and of itself. We were unaware until we actually started filming how upset Katie was with the church and how hard she was having the time to deal with it.
And did anybody hesitate to sort of revisit some of these issues? I mean, you mentioned, Melinda, that coming off of years of sort of steady progress for equal rights, including the Supreme Court's decision that legalized gay marriage nationwide, 2016 started a very consistent backlash, and we've seen this with the Ron DeSantis is sort of trumpeted his the Don't Say Gay bill that he signed in Florida. I mean, it's become sort of the coin of the realm for a number of politicians. Was anybody hesitant to talk and go kind of on the record? I could understand being a little hesitant about that.
Yes. In fact, there were a number of families who did not feel that they could participate. They were certainly interested in the project, but they feared for, any sort of retribution within their communities, particularly at their jobs. That's your livelihood, which we understood, which is also why we refer to our families as courageous families. Beyond being LGBTQ plus, the fact that they were able to come forward and share their stories in situations and communities that may engender also increasing backlash.
Yeah, I was struck too at just the diversity just in what people do for a living and where they were in the Midwest. Some people were in cities, in Des Moines. Some people were in the Air Force and actually felt more at home, it seemed, in the Air Force, which a lot of progress started with the repeal of don't ask, don't tell. But I found that sort of fascinating that you have very small towns, you have a military installation, you focus on a caucus, an equality caucus in the Minnesota House of Representatives, and it just seems like it's such a wide tapestry. And again, I don't know how you got this all into an hour because there's just so many voices.
One of the things that we've heard from people after they've watched it is they're really rooting for these people, and they wish that they had, that they could see more. And we would have loved to have been able to include more. And so perhaps there's another project down the line where we can do something a little bit longer. But we do pack in a lot of information in a very straightforward manner that was really well thought out. And Melinda had a very sort of a vision for how she wanted to create these little story arcs within the film.
For us, it was a way to touch on these very specific issues. As you mentioned, some people were facing discrimination within the church. Other people were facing that within the school, and how they were able to, or just within their own families. I think what was interesting for us is after the, even before marriage equality passed, if you were an out LGBTQ plus person, you often had to present as the perfect family in order to be acceptable. And we were hoping that we got to the point where families could be like any other family, which also meant messy. So
Right.
in some ways, so we deal with
Are
the
you saying
effects
there are
of
gay
divorce.
screw-ups out there?
There are gay screw-ups out there. Hello. Nice to meet you. Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. And we wanted to show that, for example, with Deb and Jen, how Jen's transition affected the whole family and reverberated throughout that sometimes it's not such an easy process and what that looks like. And they're also handling the effects of, children handling the effects of a divorce. So we didn't want
Yeah.
to shy away from that. And we didn't want to also say, geez, these are all external issues. They are external issues, but they complicate sometimes, what any other family is feeling and dealing with.
Yeah. And part of our goal here was to show that these families are very much like any other family. They have financial burdens, they have health issues that they have to deal with. And it was important for us to go, to the heartland, to, as Melinda earlier said, family values, because these families also have family values. It's not much unlike anybody else. And Michaela brought up a very interesting thing. When her father transitioned, she said there's usually so much emphasis and so much about the person that is struggling with their transition and what they have to go through, but there's very little dialogue of what it's like for the people around them. And it was interesting that she touched upon that because, Melinda and I thought about that and you don't really hear too many stories about that. And so it was important to get that to be able to show that for an audience to see. And so, yes, we did pack in a lot in that hour. But I think it's, we really made it tight and concise and really hope that people can think about this and perhaps change their views of what they may have thought or what they don't know about what it's like to be a gay family. And that was also important for us.
Yeah, I was particularly struck with the family you just mentioned that it works itself out, but you can tell that there's still some tension there, like any family, and this isn't just a situation where it's like it happens and there's maybe a little awkwardness and then everybody moves on and cue credits and happy time music. I mean there's a struggle. I mean the kids, and the ex-wife, are very upfront about how painful and awkward and expensive, it was all these sort of issues that sometimes don't get explored. I think in just the broader cultural set, that there's the societal effect, and then there's the effect on individual families, and it's quite a complicated turn there.
And in fact, again, as David said, that was deliberate to include that. But we also wanted, the goal was not to, in putting together the film, to be in any way preachy. We wanted people to fall into these stories, as any good story. And good stories are often complicated. So that was a deliberate choice, that you end up, in some situations, it's so obvious you're rooting for these families. And in other situations, you're really identifying with these families, saying, oh my gosh, we're going through this divorce. And, identification with someone doesn't always happen in a good way. Most of us aren't perfect families. Nee and Katie, in some ways, feel like the perfect family. And that's not, 80% of us out there. So that was a deliberate choice to focus on the external effects of, being expelled from your church, having your child bullied in school, but then to, at the very end, look at, gosh, what are the reverberations of transition itself? And as David said, how does that affect family?
And what was great about Trish, the ex-wife, is, I'm sure many people will initially think of her, well, she was a victim. Her husband left her and transitioned, but she stuck with it, and she really tried to make a point for her children to learn more about what it is like for the trans community and what that's like. And she has stuck together, and, they still speak to one another. So, here is a woman who people may think, wow, she really had it tough, but she's managed to pull through on this, and they've been able to reestablish a bond of some sort to be able to still parent their children. And I think that was also important to show, that there's some resilience here.
Yeah, and I think that, and I'm going to start sort of transitioning to some of the political stuff, here, because I think what's very interesting about it too is that because the framework is within the Midwest, it takes away this idea that that equal rights for people is some sort of woke construct from coastal elites who live in West Hollywood and Greenwich Village. We've got a couple who's farming, literally, scooping poop and and milking goats and so forth. And it doesn't, and I, as being somebody who grew up on a cattle ranch in Arizona, I've always wondered, there's so many rich stories, political stories, everywhere you look, not just in Washington and New York and California. And I wonder, there is this weird retro vibe with some of the comments from Speaker Johnson. even, we had a Christmas tree lighting, and I had not heard the reason for the season in a long time. And that was part of what he was talking about with the, the Christmas season and so forth. And I feel like, talk about your reactions. Obviously this film was, pardon me, I hit my mic. This film was, your project was in post-production or even ready for the shoot, right? By the time Johnson was selected as Speaker of the House. But what was going through your mind as you're learning about Mike Johnson? Because to me, there's a lot of almost 1990s culture war cliches that are coming out, family values and things like this. And I realize that some of the stuff that has come up are things that he wrote 20 years ago. So some of the language that we're seeing in the positions is dated, but he hasn't really backed away from those positions either.
He hasn't. When we started this film, it was in reaction to the 2016 election, as Melinda earlier said. 2 years later, now that we've shot it, we've been into these families, there is more fear now, I think, amongst the LGBTQ people. This year alone saw the greatest amount of anti-gay and anti-trans legislation or bills into legislation this year alone, as well as, the number 3 most powerful individual in government holding these discriminatory views. I think there's a real danger for the LGBTQ plus community.
In Iowa, Nia and Katie mentioned, 13 years ago, at the time that it was filmed, Iowa had actually was on the vanguard of gay rights, and now they're questioning whether that kind of thing is going to hold. And what is it? What do you think is at work here? Because it does seem to be a situation where there is it's not even so much backlash as this is part of the agenda now. Has it always been there, or was there a time when it felt as if there was just going to be progress in one direction for because it seems like it's been a steady buildup since you said 2016, and now it's just it's just the agenda for one political party.
I would think, or how it feels anyway, that it was always sort of there. It was under the surface. And that after the election, it was okay to give voice to that discrimination, to that hatred in many ways. And it was fueled. I also think sometimes with the passage of marriage equality, the minute it was codified, it went from don't ask, don't tell to, okay, this is real. That's when people feel empowered to speak out against it. It's a little, I don't know quite what the right word is, but, they feel that, gosh, this is so in my face in a way that now I can stand up to it and express these views in a really outward, ugly way.
Well, you also didn't. It didn't help that you had a president that was also, served as a role model to be able to speak out against things and make fun of people. So that certainly didn't help matters.
And I wonder too about I remember it was at the convention in Cleveland in 2016, and when Donald Trump was giving his his keynote speech, he very much leaned in and said, I will protect the LGBTQ community. And even at that point, in 2016, not as many people were putting the Q on to the LGBT. And I thought, like, well, that's odd, because that seems like something like, I don't know what speechwriter had worked on that, but it seemed like, sort of out of the blue. And then, of course, the actions of the administration were just the opposite of that. But I was wondering what you thought, like when if you're cued into that, you can be forgiven for not wanting to spend a lot of time listening to political convention speeches. But what was going through your mind in that moment? Because I very distinctly remember that I was in the hall and I thought, like, oh, that's interesting.
Well, I will even give Trump the benefit of the doubt. He may have truly thought that. We know, we know that his daughter had many gay friends and was amongst many gay circles. And probably when he said that, I think that there was a faction of the Republican Party that did not like that. And I think that was a beginning point to say, like, no, you're going a little too far here. This is not the way we want to go. And now I think Trump just, he's banded to that section where he does not want to give the rights that we deserve.
It's odd. Yeah, you would think that it would be very difficult not to know, people in the community if you're in New York real estate and finance. And it's possible, that he knows fewer now that he is more sequestered into a political life. It seems like it may be easier to put the blinders on as you get more into politics, which is ironic because politics is supposed to be about bringing people of different, value systems and communities together, as opposed to New York real estate. But what do I know? You look like you're about to say something, Melinda.
Well, I always felt that Trump goes where the votes are and where the most adulation is, where people will speak out with the greatest voice. And I do believe that's a minority of people, but they're very loud in their discrimination. And yeah, I think he goes, this is where my most vocal supporters are. So I will, as David said, I will abandon what was probably a genuine acceptance of the LGBTQ community because I'm more interested in the ascension of my political career.
So we're sort of getting towards the end of the year for Congress. They're debating all kinds of things. They're not under the threat of a shutdown, which is a change for the last few months. What do you think would be the key to getting somebody like Mike Johnson to empathize, with the message, with the people in your film, this and the stories behind them, and people who would also be going along with his positions on LGBTQ rights, because it seems like how to get out of the echo chamber, so to speak. Like, what's the key there? Because I was very struck by one of the couples. It was two black men who in Nebraska, and they moved in. This is the ones that stationed in the Air Force, and their neighbors, they were saying, like, I can't believe my neighbors voted for Trump, but we love them and they love us, and it's just great. I mean, is it as simple as those sort of small human connections?
In some ways. In other ways, I think to us it's thinking something all the way through. Nia says in the film, to her, what she wants people to know is we're not just issues, we're people, that these are popular issues now, for better or worse. So I think if by, almost by accident, again, you fall into the story, you're rooting for these people, you're understanding these people, that the next time you go to vote, you think, instead of thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me, which is different than being against a community. It is just not embracing a community or simply being aware of how these issues affect this, how this legislation affects this community. So I like to think there's a possibility that people will just think beyond. It's not necessarily changing their views. It is thinking past the limitations of what they've thought before. Now, extremist views around any topic are extremist views, and I don't think there's too much you can do about those views.
Yeah, I heard an interview with Secretary Buttigieg, and he said, wow, I would love the speaker to come to my house and see me and my husband Chasden and how we deal with our kids. I don't know if the speaker will take him up on that, but hopefully he will, and hopefully the people that have these views will recognize that gay families are not much different than any other family.
I think that's all I have. Would either one of you like to have anything left unsaid? I do want to just note again that the documentary premieres on Hulu on December 6th, streaming for those of you who have Hulu subscriptions. But I will leave the sort of the final words to make sure that we haven't left anything uncovered.
Well, to me, I think it's simply saying these are good stories. It's not about specifically these are, yes, of course, the subjects in the film are LGBTQ, but that is not the reason to necessarily watch the film. The reason to watch the film is to fall for the stories, to fall in the stories, to care about these people, and to put that first. To not necessarily say, well, this is marginal content that doesn't apply to me, but hopefully to say, gosh, I just want to, hopefully watch a good film, and whatever happens after that, in a positive way is fantastic. But the real reason to watch the film is to, you're going to enjoy this experience.
December 6th, Hulu.
Well, David, Melinda, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about the film. Melinda, you're the director. David, you're the executive producer, and also featuring still photography, I noticed.
Stills as well.
Thank you so much for coming on Political Theater and talking about your movie, and wish you all the best.
Thank you
for having
us. Thank you very much.